well, I got on the website and I started looking around. I thought, I wonder who my representative is. Because I had no idea. I had no clue. I did not know any elected official at all. Not even their names, not even close. I voted. I didn't know who I was voting for, but I voted. And that's about it. That's about as close as I got. And I got on the website and found that my representative was Matt Collins. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. So I started reading about him and things and doing some research on his little website to find out about him. I found his phone number and I called. And I started talking to his secretary. And I said, hi, this is Melody Mena, and I'm the incoming president of my chapter for the Association of Operating Room Nurses, which was what we were called back then. And we're going to have this really great, big, huge kickoff in your district, in Matt Collins' district, and we're going to invite these doctors and all these CEOs of the hospitals are coming, and they all want to hear Matt Collins talk about healthcare issues, and I need him to be the keynote speaker. And they said, well, this sounds pretty good. We'll run it by him. And they called back later on, and they said, yeah, if he'd like to do that, that'd be great. And I said, oh, great, this is wonderful. So I hung up the phone, and I called an emergency board meeting, and I sort of called my newly elected board and told them that I sort of made up this thing that we were supposed to do in 5 weeks. While I was calling Matt Collins' office trying to tell him, oh yeah, we've changed where we're having the meeting at because we're going to have extra people there we didn't plan on, which I never even had a meeting place. I just sort of made it up because they asked me where it was. I had to tell them something. So anyways, so that's what I told him. I said, we sort of changed the place. So anyways, and well, while I was doing this, I was like, well, can I have an appointment with him too, like 2 weeks after this? Do you mind? And he said, no, you can have an appointment with him. So I made this appointment with him and everything. And then I called AORN and I said, hey, I've got like this appointment with Matt Collins, and what do I say? So they told me, you need to talk to him about HICFA. Talk to him about HICFA. And I'm like, okay. So I went and got some friends of mine and dragged them along because there was no way I was going in that meeting by myself. And I dragged some friends along, and we talked about the operating room nurse and what we did and why we're so important and everything and the whole HICFA thing. And Matt Collins was absolutely horrified. And he said, I will write a letter and I will get it to you. And he faxed me that letter the next day that he had sent. So I called back and thanked him for the letter and asked for another appointment. And so he gave me another appointment. And I would bring somebody different each time. So then I called AORN and I said, okay, it's Melody, and the HICFA thing went great, and they gave us a letter and everything, and I made another appointment, so what do I say? And they said, okay, this is what you need to talk about this, and everything. And we met with him probably 4 or 5, 6 times. I found his itinerary on the website, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I showed up to every single town hall meeting, to every parade, to everything. I would drag my family, and I would be right there waving, hi, Mac! And he would be on the back of a car going down the road, and he would go, here she is again. My husband's like, Melody, he thinks you're stalking him. I went in there, and I said, Mac, I want you to introduce this legislation. It's ready. We need to do it. I want you to introduce it. And he said, okay. And I was like, what? And we just kind of smiled at each other and looked at each other like, oh my God, he said yes. He said yes. Did you hear that? He said yes. And so I was like, oh, thank you, God. And I was like, well, okay, that's good. Thanks a lot. And everything goes, well, Melody, even the snail made it to the ark. And then we were walking out, and I shook his hand. I said, oh, man, thank you so much for introducing this legislation. I mean, really, thank you. I am so glad because now I don't have to run against you.
We are creating a sustainable community that will house up to 96 women, which will be financially challenged and/or veteran women. On this community, what we'll do is educate the women, and they will learn how to run the center that will serve the public with business development, education, short-term rental space, dining, gardening, and we will be self-sustaining within 9 months to a year.
So I had a really interesting conversation with Elizabeth, and you're right, her project is incredibly ambitious, but that's part of the beauty of it, I think, because she has such a global idea of how she wants to help people. And so the way that I interacted with her was really to listen to her about the project and try to understand what she wanted to accomplish, find out something about her background, and also her plans for moving forward and who she'd met, who she was talking to, how she was hoping to really make that project work. So my role is really to be interested in what she's doing and find out what her plans are that may affect our county. Whether or not it affects my district it's obviously important to me. I want to know if there are projects or ideas or benefits that somebody has in mind for my specific district, but I also, as a supervisor, you're concerned about the county as a whole, and I think her project has tremendous potential. So, but at this point, I was most interested in what's your vision and what's your ideas for how you are going to accomplish that. Go off and make great progress, and then we'll talk more in the future as her plans solidify. So that's how I interacted with her on that project.
Is there something
My first response is, tell me something about you. Who are you? And how did you become interested in this particular project? What skill set do you bring to this project, and why does it have meaning to you? So I really want to find out about the person, and then I want to find out what their ideas for the project is. In this instance, she wants to help women who were in the military. And so I asked her about, well, what's your connection to the military? Why does this resonate for you? And I had a conversation with her about that. And then I wanted to get a sense of sort of what her skill set was and what her ability was to connect with people who she will need to help her. So I then pursued that. What are you doing? Who are you talking to? Who are you meeting? And she had, very interesting things to say there, and I think she's someone who's really skilled at establishing connections with people and getting people interested in her project. So in part, that's a process of kind of verification for me that this isn't somebody with just a big idea that sounds great, but perhaps not the skills or the bandwidth to move it forward. What that means to me is I'm looking for someone who has the sense, has the understanding that it's important for them to be able to move a project forward and figure out who can help them. And they're not just coming into the supervisor and saying, here's my great idea, I want you to make it happen. Because of course, that's unrealistic. People out in the world need to figure out who in their environment can help them, what are possible sources of funding, what's a realistic view of what it takes to accomplish any kind of program, whether it's just a program to help people. In her case, it's particularly complex because she obviously wants to help people. There's a sort of mental and physical health aspect to it, but it's also a land use project. She actually wants to build housing for these women, and that's tremendously complicated. And so to do that, to be able to make that happen, a person needs to understand what it takes and how you start putting together the package to make that happen.
Okay, good. But you talk about bandwidth. What would a person who has bandwidth, what would they have?
Okay. They'd have the ability to communicate their vision. They'd have an ability to understand that they're going to have funding needs. They'll have needs from the community where they want to go in and actually build the building. They have the ability to understand that they're going to need to interact both with residents of that community, because anything like this takes getting other people in the community involved. They'll need to interact with the city council if they end up in a city or town, just an understanding of the process. Right. Well, so, and I'll come at that a couple of different ways. One of the things that I really like to do in this position is help bring people together. And that it's easier for me to do that, or I have a better ability to do that, if I get the sense of the person who has the vision as someone who can conduct themselves with other people. And they may come in here not having those connections, but they have an innate ability to communicate, and they have an understanding, as she did, that you go to a public event, you're seated next to somebody at the table who turns out to be an investment banker from some bank, you strike up a conversation, you have sort of a practical vision of how to make something happen. And once I see that skill set in somebody, and we did have this conversation, I can say, well, did you think about this? Did you think about that organization? It would be good if you talked to those people. And we can kind of brainstorm together. What I want to be able to do in that particular context is to help that person think about who they need to hook up with and talk to. And I can certainly sometimes provide names. You know, have you talked to so-and-so at this organization? They might be able to help you. Have you talked to some of our local banks for funding? Have you talked to some of the larger regional banks? You know, do you have a sense of land use planning? What town are you going to go into, and here are the players? I like to help people get together with who they need to talk to.
Okay, contrast that with an organization coming in that has staff, that has resources, that's done the research, and that has maybe members or lots of people already engaged. And what I'm wondering is, if you as a supervisor do not have to make decisions that are going to be more likely to work with someone like that, with a group that's already organized, than just an individual coming in.
So it really depends on the project, you know, and it's not that I'd necessarily have a preference for a group over an individual. If there's an individual who I think really has the dynamism and the ability to bring resources to bear, then I want to support them make that happen. Whereas an organization that already has the bandwidth, that's exciting, of course, because you're several steps up the pyramid and where you need to be to have something accomplished. But I don't know that I'd say, you know, I'd necessarily pick one or the other just because one's an organization and the other's an individual. Then it really becomes an issue for me of what's the program and what's the project and what are you trying to accomplish, and is that something that I can help with in some way, or that I think is ultimately going to be achievable in this county, or that has a benefit particularly for southern Marin. So I go through, you know, there's a lot of factors that you go through in making those kinds of assessments. You know, one of the challenges for me and for anybody who's in a busy position is figuring out that balance between being proactive and reactive, right? Because there's so much on the table that I have to address and I have to deal with in the normal course. And then there's things that are really dear to my heart that I'd want to be out in front of and I want to push. And so part of it is figuring out my own bandwidth, right? As well as the person I'm talking to. So somebody could come to me with a fantastic project and I think, wow, that's great. And I sure hope you can make it succeed because my plate is so full. Probably the most I can offer is a sympathetic ear and encouragement and maybe some connections that'll help you. Well, talking to us is tremendously important, and being engaged is tremendously important. I mean, you're knowledgeable about Marin County, and so you know what an incredibly engaged community we have here already. But even so, I think there's a lot of people, as is only natural, who are not as engaged with our county government as I'd like to see them. And so what people need to do, all of us supervisors have different ways in which we communicate with our constituents. A lot of us have newsletters. We've particularly in this office are getting more and more fond of doing what we call our eGov blast, where we do an email message out on an update on particular topics to keep people informed. We also encourage people to sign up, because you need to affirmatively take action to sign up for our email communications. So if they really want us to do something, contact us, email us. You know, I look at my email, my aides are crucial in reaching out to constituents and addressing issues.
Jane Macta had called me and asked me to make a phone call to my congressman's office, letting him know that there was a letter coming and that he needed to be aware of it, and we needed him to sign on to it. I'm a constituent of his office, so I did in fact make the phone call requesting for his attention to this letter. I spoke to the voicemail of his aides and explained to her what I needed from Congressman Saxton, and that this letter was extremely important. They signed on. They were in agreement with the letter. They're going to go push it through, and you know, it all worked out. One phone call, that's all it took.